I chose a random album, which nobody ever seems to know apart from a few people. It's called Goat's Head Soup by the Rolling Stones. And Goat's Head Soup was recorded in tougher conditions for the Stones. It was in the Caribbean, and they were having their usual ups and downs with band members. But for that, it shows each track of the album and what each individual contributed to each track. So what I do with the film plots is take an individual as a tube line, and their character interacts with other characters. But all the characters' tube lines have got to be on the map at all times. I worked on this Mick Jagger's 50th birthday party as crew, and we were pissed off with him because at 4 a.m. he was still dancing. And me and these other young guys, this is a long time ago, obviously, it was his 50th, we were stood there going, why can't he stop? He's an old man. He's 50. You're plotting the character's constant existence in that world whilst the film exists, so there's always around.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Mike Bell, the founder and owner of a thriving new business called Mike Bell Maps, which describes itself as tube maps of bands and other stuff. He's the first data visualiser to appear on Data Malarkey, and do we have a treat in store? Mike's had a long career in creating and running tours for bands, a blend of logistical and strategic planning to the power of Excel. I see tours in Excel, I think he said to me when we first met. He moved from arena and stadium tours for bands to production of live events for corporates, staging major conferences, events and exhibitions right around the world, usually without even going to see the final result. A combination of the first COVID lockdown, not a good couple of years for anyone in the live entertainment and production business, and a diagnosis of Parkinson's some years ago convinced Mike that he had to use it or lose it when it came to his highly creative, data-driven brain. He started out by trying to represent the career of one of his favourite bands, The Fall, using the iconography, lines and stations of the London Underground. Once he got The Fall right, to the satisfaction of the band's vocal and perhaps a little pedantic online fan base, Mike applied his unique and beautiful way of visualising the world of band lineups and album contributors to many different spheres. These included films and film genres, and even, in perhaps my favourite example, disgraced former Prime Minister Johnson's political career, with a special line for all those lockdown-breaking parties. Mike's encouragement to keep mentally active from his neurologist has paid dividends. Though diagnosed several years ago, his using it strategy means that he's not yet been medicated for his Parkinson's. A tale almost as extraordinary as the beautiful manifestations of how he thinks, that he now sells both online and from a new shop in my hometown of Lewes, East Sussex. Mike, welcome to Data Malarkey.
What a fabulous introduction, thank you. I didn't realise I've been so busy.
Well, listen, it's fantastic to have you with us. Now, I trust, is that a decent summary of who you are and what you do? Is there anything that you'd like to add, anything I've got wrong?
Yeah, no, less rock and roll. I mean, that was very much an early youth thing, but very much more into early stage of my career. It was all about resources and equipment, which I think we might talk about later, and planning and managing stuff. And then the horrible corporate world, which I still exist in sometimes. I've just literally pushed off another design, so I'm still doing that a bit. Mainly design, and I have no qualifications in design whatsoever. Hurrah!
Very good. Now listen, before we get down and dirty with data, I want to go beyond the new day job and start with a question that's designed to get to the heart of you. It doesn't necessarily ask you to tell us about the work that you're doing. It could be that that's all consuming. But I'd like you to tell us, if you would, Mike, how do you spend your time?
Yeah. Well, if you open a shop, and it's the first time I've worked in a shop in my life, you don't have much spare time. But I relax with film. I watch a lot of movie, foreign films. Fitzgerald, I just watched the other day again with Kinski, and that's absolute madness, utter madness, absolute project management there with no data resources. And I watch a lot of football. Brighton Hove Albion, season ticket since the Championship days. Me and my son, we travel around the country, and I've attempted to map football. Don't try it.
Well, listen, when we met, the first thing that sprung to my mind was the old rock and roller who did have a long rock and roll career, Pete Frame, the creator of Rock Family Trees. What you do and what he did are very, very different. But One of your posters is misbehaving behind you. No worry at all. What you do is very different. But actually, the time that I was working with Frame, he had applied his rock family trees expertise to. I'd rather not swear, but we have to feel sorry for them these days. Manchester United, from the Busby Babes onwards. But listen, let's. So Brighton and Hove Albion touring around the country. That must be increasingly satisfying. Presumably, if you've been from the Championship days, you had a few Withdean moments as well, did you? In that awful experience.
I was lucky to avoid that. No, it was. My sons were born in Brighton. I wasn't, so I was encouraged to have my sons support their local team by a friend. And there was a history of Chelsea in the family. And my oldest son is refusing to commit to Brighton in any way. And he's Chelsea through and through. But I kind of gave up with Chelsea when the numbers crunched in favour of oligarchs and dodgy stuff. So Brighton's a lot more respectable. And the guy who runs it, Mr. Bloom, he's a numbers man. He really is.
He most certainly is. Now, listen. I know you said it wasn't a big part of your career, but let's go. Maybe let's look before we think about the way that you're visualizing bands and movies and political careers going down the toilet, and maybe others too. Can we start with the work that you did as a planner and organizer of rock and roll tours, and maybe then also think about the corporate work as well? Can you talk about kind of the type of data and maybe the kind of the sort of early pioneering use of spreadsheets to bring all that data into order for these live events?
Yeah, I mean, the rock stuff really was me at the back end of it in terms of less along big logistics and more literally getting stuff out the door, equipment wise. I did work on some projects, but spreadsheets when they came in were like a revelation, absolutely. In terms of we have equipment, it has to be in a warehouse, it has to leave the building on a certain date to hit the truck. It's got to travel. Back then we were carnies. We're back to carnies now. You had to list everything, and you do now have to list everything. The spreadsheets was a revelation, really, in terms of being able to align things and plot. And it's literally a list of equipment down the side and a row of dates to the right, and you allocated, and it's manual. But until then, we used to have these big books, which were equivalent to spreadsheets. And you would have a book, so you pencil in, rubbing kit in and out and moving it around that way. So rental is very, very poorly, and the show industry is based on rental. It's equipment coming in and out of places. And it was never very well served by any sort of software at any stage until recently, in the past sort of decade or two. But before that, it was a manual operation, and you needed to be very aware of what the equipment was, where it was. And you were working with some people who really just wanted to have fun and a laugh, especially in the rock and roll days, and then moving across to the corporate side, everyone got a bit more sensible, but still, a lot of crew didn't understand why you were trying to find where the kit was. They didn't want to know, which is fair enough, but managing was hard.
I can imagine. I did some work a few years ago with the lighting company Ava Lights at the on the Hanger Lane Directory, and I was always very impressed with. I mean, I suppose their mixing desks and lighting rigs and the rest of it are very expensive pieces of kit, but I was always very impressed with their attention to detail in terms of what was where. It was almost like they had a way of visualizing it. It was almost like a cab fleet. You could see what different bits of kit were where. I'm also wondering if you can listen. I probably until we get onto the maps, I won't bang on about rock and roll. But I'm also wondering if you were also responsible for in these either in live events for corporates or for bands for the rider, for what would go kind of backstage, what was required to go backstage. I'm reminded of that fantastic, probably apocryphal story about Van Halen, who was said to have as the last item on their rider a bowl of M&Ms, only brown ones, and they knew that if the riggers hadn't got down to the only brown M&Ms, then they wouldn't go on stage because they hadn't taken it seriously enough. Were you ever involved in making sure that the right type of whiskey was kind of backstage?
No, that's a very specialised knowledge and game to play. You can be very political to play that sort of game. God no. But the stuff we saw going on the back of trucks in terms of flight cased everything was flight cased for a lot of these guys. And you've got to look after them. These days it's even, I can't imagine what it's like now in terms of some of these performers and the amount of people around them. Yes, and it's that sort of support of. For the physical side, and they got to keep going. Taylor Swift's fit as fiddle, and she's got to keep on top of it. God knows how Mick Jagger does it. I worked on Mick Jagger's 50th birthday party as crew, and we were pissed off with him because at 4 a.m. he was still dancing. And me and these other young guys, this is a long time ago, obviously, it says 50th. We were stood there going, "Why can't he stop? He's an old man. He's 50. He should stop." But you've got to let them do what they do. That's what they do.
Very good. So those skills that you cut your teeth with there proved then and continue to kind of endure to be valuable in terms of kind of corporate events and conferences.
I mean the stuff we stage, it's as big as rock and roll shows. There's the video elements and massive now LED walls, lighting rigs. We'd be sending 3 or 4 40-foot trucks across to Europe to do a conference for 250 bankers. You would be rigging overnight, building stuff for a couple of days. You look back now and you still look at what's being built and stuff I design. I try hard, but there's a lot of waste. But there's a lot of resources, and it doesn't get easier because you never have enough time. And that's one thing you can't add to is time. It's.
And does it? I mean, are there different? I mean, I'm a bit of I told you I'm a data storyteller. I'm a bit of a data nerd. Does it? Are there different types of, particularly in this kind of corporate staging world? Are there different types of data, or is it basically kind of scaling up from what you were doing when spreadsheet? Well, first of all manually, and then when spreadsheets came in for rock and roll.
Yeah, you're constantly scheduling. So the time scheduling side of it. So you've got to hit deadlines, but you've also working with resources which need managing before they get there and whilst they get there. And there's the content is king. And if you're talking about pure data, that's what it is these days. There's nothing analog. When I first started out, we didn't have data projection. If you're literally talking about data, it's about what goes on screens, and it's managing content, and the requirements there just to look after the content, let alone the physicality of making the things appear on screen. It's all these individuals with these skills just come together, and it happens. It works. It very rarely cocks up. That's the beauty. It's people with experience. And a lot of those people we lost because of lockdown, we never came back to it because the work never returned.
I do quite. I don't know. I do maybe 2 or 3 a month. Something because of COVID. Some of them still online. Many of them in person events. Not necessarily for big global corporates, but quite often. And I have to say, it's terribly reassuring to be in the hands of kind of professionals like you. When your slides are going to be there, they will have been checked. I'm a Mac man, and so I try not to use weird fonts, but even so, embedded videos, all of these kind of things, proper AV, booking in time for a sound check. It's so reassuring. And by contrast, it's so potentially discombobulating when you see an event run by a bunch of amateurs who, hope that you can, who are saying, we're not really getting the sound through, or can you click your slides manually? Anyway, it's very, very, very reassuring.
On that basis, that's why I've actually mapped conference production, which my clients love. So it shows the production process, how people come together from the beginning and through. And basically, it shows why you need so many people on site. When the client says, "Do we need all these people?"
Absolutely, no, absolutely right. Now, listen. When my wife had seen that you'd opened your shop and we'd had lunch just around the corner, she said, "I think you're going to quite like this shop." And then I hope I didn't stop any kind of pre-Christmas sales, but we're kind of gassing. you were very, very open and very candid, and you haven't resiled at all in my introduction about your Parkinson's diagnosis. Can you tell us a bit more about that, and also, if I'm getting the either the story right or the recommendation right, your kind of neurologist recommendation to use it or lose it? Can you tell us a bit kind of how that happened, how that impacted on you, and your kind of use of your brain to kind of keep it in its extraordinary data visualizing state?
It was about 8 or 9 years ago. I had first symptoms. I'd been working silly hours through the night, and there was a lot of big rundown. I wasn't in a good place on many levels, relationship and everything else. But this diagnosis came through. You worry. You think, what am I going to do about it? I did take drugs initially because they were just thrown at me with a pile of drugs. You took more drugs because of the drug side effects. I was in a dreadful state physically, but what I didn't want to do was lose my mental capacity. And the consultant said, you're doing a good job with your design work. That's brilliant because you're learning about everything. You're getting involved, you're making things, you're finding things out in order to get these designs happening for all the shows and stuff. So the show work was feeding me, but very much I wanted something else to just keep my brain going each day. I actually started off writing, it sounds mad, but writing poetry every day. There's 2,700 poems of mine online at the moment. And that for me, it's like doing a crossword every day. But I hate crosswords, so it was an alternative. But then I started, with lockdown, and my show work disappeared, and I was living alone by then. It was pretty terrifying. Your political side stuff aside, living off savings and stuff, and not getting any support. I'd come off the drugs by then. I'd started getting fitter. I was approaching the mental thing a lot more positively, and I saw that there was an opportunity, possibly, to stretch myself, and that's how I started the mapping. Was partly to keep myself engaged. And the consultant said, it is a case of not just because you've got Parkinson's, but for any of us. Aging is you've got to engage mentally and learn, and be always looking out for something to push your mind. So be it learning a language or whatever, that's what we're told to do now, and we got to do it. All of us got to do it. So the Parkinson's was like a wake up call. It was a great insight into getting old, because once I came off the drugs and just used other strategies like just a healthier living, living the kind of life I wanted to live. I've refixed myself, and this is me. It's me again. It's me. I'm doing this. I've got to do it. No one else is going to do it. It's the good stuff has come out of that. Good stuff's come out of Parkinson's. Good stuff's come out of lockdown eventually. And I'm in a very positive frame of mind, which is another aspect to learning and relearning. It keeps you mentally healthily open-minded about stuff.
It is a kind of salutary lesson, but it's incredibly encouraging to hear that kind of self-determination and that kind of will to not not to let this kind of grind you down and not to feel sorry for yourself, but two, actually to be able to come off the, as you say, the avalanche of drugs that throw at you. Just before we talk about your first foray with The Fall, and I think I'm right in saying that you picked on The Fall because you are a fan of The Fall, or you?
Well, I'm in the 80s music, but they were the most difficult band I could imagine doing.
Let's come back to that in a second. I want you to tell us a little bit more about this poem project, because am I right in thinking that you've set yourself the task of writing 10,000 poems, one a day, which takes you kind of well into past 80 years, right?
Yeah, 85 years old is a theory, and if I miss a day, I've got a longer deadline. So yeah, it's me kind of journaling, and I write stuff which people say it's about me. I said, no, it's not about you. I've just watched a film. I've written about someone in the film, but I'm responding to it, and I have this formula and this way of doing it. It's very driven by shape, usage of certain rules which only I know about. So when I die, nobody will know what the rules were. But they might have worked them out by then. But it really is it's not poetry which is it's controlled. It's very managed. Which I've only talked to you guys and talked to people in the shop recently. I am on the spectrum.
Different people have different the spectrum forces us to have different kind of guardrails. I haven't read 2,700. I've kind of dipped and I've dipped and flicked, and we'll include a link in the show notes to it. I think it's an amazing project. But it's clearly I could feel rules, but I mean, listen, it'll either be a future PhD thesis or it'll be generative AI that'll work out your rules. Now, so before we talk about the Ford example, tell us what gave you the idea to blend. I mean, it is the London Underground iconography, right? Do you use my favourite font invented not 10 miles away from where we're speaking? Do you use Johnson, the London Underground font?
No, I use P22 Underground font, I'm afraid.
Is it similar to Johnson?
Yeah, it's very similar, and there's things about commercial usage and stuff. So
yes,
it's commercially available to do what I'm doing with. So there's freedoms there. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's an absolute nod to the London Underground. I looked at I literally looked when I lived in Lewis. I always thought about doing a Lewis tube map. Somebody really has done one, but I literally started doing location stuff. And I thought, no, other people are doing this, but I want to be more challenged. What else could I do? And what else is a connection? What else interconnects? And for some reason, it struck me musical histories, albums, the story of albums and that pathway. And there's something we're losing anyway with streaming and our need to drop in and out of a song. We no longer hold an album and play an album, unless you're going back into vinyl, which is more prevalent. So I challenged myself, and the toughest band I could think of was The Fall, with a story about Marquis Smith sacking everybody. And I went down that route. So I started there for no reason apart from to challenge myself, not as a design project to make money, not as a possible poster project or anything like that. No, it was never meant to go on a T-shirt. It hasn't gone on a T-shirt, but that's where I started with it.
So you weren't I like your choice. Go difficult, and then after that things may be more straightforward. But you mentioned when we first met that the Fall community of fans were constructive, but perhaps a little bit pedantic in helping you get to the final finished product.
Yeah, I had a go, and I'm on Twitter X, and I posted up. There's a hashtag Fall Friday, which is the third week. Yes. Yeah. So I posted up there, and lots of responses came in, and it took 13 attempts to get it right, according to the fans. By which point they then said, "Oh, can we buy it?" And I thought, okay. So I then sat there with my other websites, which were about other things. Had to set up a shop, so I went and did that. Never run an online store before, so I did that from scratch, and just started learning about that, as well as mapping more and more and more. So currently at 50 bands, although I have researched another 50 again and ready to start mapping. And I think it's a research bit which is as interesting as the plotting, I think, for you guys.
Absolutely right. I mean, even relatively straightforward, shall we say, bands that didn't have enormous kind of changes but have had a long career. You mentioned being at Jagger's 50th and resenting him dancing, but 4 in the morning. But when the first time I was in your shop, I was looking at the Stones one, and can you explain a bit about kind of some of the complexity with the same individual playing multiple instruments or having multiple roles?
Yeah, so you look at any sort of band history, and there's a core group of band members. And so what I was doing with something like The Fall originally was just trying to work out who was in the band for that particular album and onwards. You then, because you're researching this information, and the information you have to correlate and check and double check before you commit it. So a band is pretty straightforward to do. When I then moved on to mapping a studio album, so that what you're referring to there is possibly is the I chose a random album which nobody ever seems to know apart from a few people. It's called Goat's Head Soup by the Rolling Stones, and Goat's Head Soup was recorded in tougher conditions for the Stones. It was in the Caribbean, and they were having their usual ups and downs with band members. But for that, it shows each track of the album and what each individual contributed to each track. So Mick Jagger might be the red central line of the world, and normally on my normal band maps you'd see him, and he became album to album. But for this particular band map, I had to then work out how to show Mick Jagger not just being the singer, but he also played piano, guitar, hand clap, and other things he did for each track. And that was a massive learning curve for me. Put me off doing another band map for a bit in terms of studio albums. But yeah, and it's just, and I look at it and it's beautiful, but it also tells a story. And that's just like surprises me every time I look at these maps all around me. People come in and just go, wow. Some people just get it straight away and they're like, man, what's your brain like?
Well, we'll definitely come back to that. But I mean, you've done a large number of bands. The most recent gig I was at was, and he's well into his 5,000s, because he had his 5,000th gig last year. Was the world's least successful rock star, John Otway, I mean, just as a boy from near Aylesbury, who's the very first gig I went to was Otway, Billy Bragg in 1982, and Nigel Planer playing Neil from the Young Ones. It's a very, very good gig. So if you haven't done an Otway, I'll strongly encourage you to do an Otway.
I have started researching Otway a while back because there was a film out about him as well.
Otway the movie, a very fine movie available for streaming.
I watched it. Yeah, it was. I found him so charming and incredible, and his fans, you must be one of them, are committed to him. Committed is a good word.
I mean, committed certainly should be. I mean, I think for me it was only the 12th time I've seen him since 1982. So I met some people, because I mean, as well as making a movie about him being the most unsuccessful rock star of all time, he also planned a world tour about 15 years ago that very, very, very nearly happened. But his fans are incredibly loyal. So well, I'm glad to hear that you started the Otway research. I'll be buying multiple copies when that one's out, I can assure you. But tell us, I mean, you've gone on from bands and from albums. You've looked at films and film genres, Bond, I know, and others, and then to kind of modern day political scoundrels as well. Tell us. I mean, you've got the concept and the way of capturing time, of capturing performance, as it were, or contribution over time, using the tube line metaphor. But tell us about. I mean, are there difficulties in moving into different areas like films, film genres, and Johnson lockdown breakage?
Yeah, films very similar to anything else like history. So film is a line of characters coming in and out of scenes. So what I do with the film plots is take an individual as a tube line, and their character interacts with other characters. But all the characters' tube lines have got to be on the map at all times. So like for Jaws, the Great White, obviously at the very beginning, the shark. But you have to call him the Great White according to the fans, which I've learned because I've engaged with them. And the Great White has his first opening sequence where he does a bit of dirty on the beach. But he disappears then until quite later in the film. But he's still got to appear. So you're plotting the character's constant existence in that world whilst the film exists. So there's always around. And so it really lent itself. Once I did a few films, I did The Shining, Back to the Future, sort of films I love watching. And playing with Back to the Future, you're playing with time as well, time travel. You're representing that.
But I mean, given that time is one of the dimensions that you map, particularly in terms of bands' careers, and the extraordinary Bond, all of the Bond films on one map, which I thought was just a work of genius. But how do you cope with going back in time?
Yeah, well, you work it out when you get there. I literally thought, well, how to help this? At the beginning of Back to the Future, you've got the Doc, but the Doc isn't from the present; he's from another time. So you have Marty interacting with him. So actually, I had this. I found another person who thinks like me. this woman came into the store and she's got it straight away. And she looks at the maps. I said, Back to the Future. I said, yeah. She said, easy. You use dashed lines, don't you? I said, yeah. How do you know that? And she kind of got it straight away. So you're using other denotations of other time frames. So that's how I got around time travel eventually.
Have you done Pulp Fiction?
I'm going to do Tarantino's oeuvre, so all his work. So I will map the people he's worked with. So the actors, because again, it's repetition. You want repetition. You want sequence. So what you're doing, you're trying to find those bits where those cross.
I just asked that because I remember well what you know kind of in the history of the internet. I remember well stumbling across in about 2000, so only about 6 years after it came out, a recut of Pulp Fiction that was done chronologically, and it was one of the most boring things I think I've ever watched. And I'm a massive fan of Pulp Fiction, but not going back in time, not messing with your head in that way was deeply irritating. When you mention history, and obviously your political, your Johnson one is obviously recent history. Do you know that classic map? At the time of recording, the Joaquin Phoenix movie Napoleon, or Ridley Scott movie Napoleon is in cinemas, including our own in Lewis. And do you know that Charles Minard map of Napoleon's army going into Russia and then the line getting thinner and thinner over time and coming back? That kind of data visualization must be something that you kind of relish and enjoy as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. I actually had the chap come in the store today talking about that map in particular. And he's a sort of quite a senior gentleman, but he's quite well known in Lewis for he's an ex-NME journalist.
Oh yeah.
And we had a really good chat because his mind is very much parallel to mine, and he's been mapping things, other stuff, the blues, history of the blues, in terms of a locational type thing in the UK, and the introduction of the impact in certain areas because the Americans came over in the Second World War, and that sort of had a blooming effect. So yeah, history and how we see things and how we forget stuff as well, and that's what the Boris Johnson map, conversations with people about that. That's been a real. We forgot so much too quickly.
Yes, despite as I said, time of recording, the inquiry is about 2 months in, and Johnson has been skewered and shed a few crocodile tears and tried to say sorry, but of course not actually said sorry. No, I need to inspect that one in more detail. But yeah, you've alluded to this already. I think it's a question I asked within 15 minutes of meeting you, and lots of other people are asking the same thing when they're coming into your shop. What's it like inside your mind? I know you can't really answer that objectively. It's like saying, do you and I see blue in the same way? Clearly, you do have a way of understanding both chronology, but also contribution and repetition and sequence. You have a way of understanding that, and then transmitting that in tube maps. Can you answer that question? What it's like inside your mind? It's normal, right? It's what you have. It's your mind.
Yeah, sorry. Because of my diagnosis, I've had a lot of brain scans.
Right.
And the last one, which was fabulous news, was a degeneration isn't that bad, which was very recent brain scan. So that's kind of moved my Parkinson's into another less offensive form, which is wonderful news. Wonderful news for me and my family and my kids. But that's nothing to do with the behaviours I've had, in theory. But thank God I'm not on the drugs. But in terms of what my brain is like, I asked ChatGPT, because I use the version 4, and I asked it to do a DAO image of my brain because it understands me. The ChatGPT I use knows a lot about me. And that's the advantage of it when you use it to write blog posts and stuff and content. And so I asked it for an image of my brain after having these conversations with yourself and other people. It came up with a beautiful picture of my brain, which was just cut away, lovely, artistically done by a computer. And it was just this mass of tube lights. I don't know whether or not it's because literally that early grounding, literally standing in warehouses and rock and roll places thinking this kit's got to come back, what's going to happen to it? And by the way, it's going to be going everywhere. And by the way, something's going to happen to it. Or I'm standing there, we've got a truck of kit going off to an exhibition, and you're panicking that you're listing every bit of kit. On that truck, there's going to be listed serial number, weight, value. And if it comes off and it gets pulled, you're buggered. It's having to get responsibility towards information in a creative environment. I'm hanging around, and at the same time, that's going to make 10,000 people very happy, that truck of kit. So I don't know. One thing which I didn't mention was I actually created a directory in my younger years of all the equipment. This is before the internet, of the equipment around the country, which was for rental, and where you could find it from. So literally, if you wanted a replacement SM58 microphone in Edinburgh, you could look at my book and find it indexed. And I used spreadsheets to make that book and do the indexing. So it was a directory, which had a short life because the internet then happened.
Now you've already mentioned making kind of vigorous use of GPT-4 and so on. I take it. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What's your feeling about the role that AI can have with kind of human oversight? Are you enthusiastic? Are you terrified? Are you both? What's your feeling about it?
For my show design work, it's going to take it away. Currently, me or my clients or an architecture firm could literally put in a sketch and you can get a rendered image out. It doesn't have the core information about behind it. So I design a set. I worry about the truss and the lighting and the construction. But if we're pitching, my client wants to see a pretty picture for no money. I charge for my clients. We pitch. They'd rather pay nothing. So it's going to take, and it's already taking away creative's work, and that's the fearful side in my life. It's going to take away a lot of our human creativity, and the stuff it does create is admirable. It's not that good, and it has it's shallow at the moment, but you'll start to get more depth to it over time. But I'm for technology. I'm for support and help as long as it's used correctly. And it's not taken as gospel. Too much we read is already generated by non-human, and that will only get worse. So distortion. I don't like distortion of facts or images, and that's what happens. Six-fingered soldiers holding children's one thing, but when it starts changing people's minds, that's the danger of it. So yeah, I'm in the middle. I'm very much in the middle.
I was amused and alarmed, probably in equal measure, by the kind of hallucinations. Although I don't know if you've experimented with two things. One is there's an AI for that, which has got a list of the 10,800 at times of recording different AIs there are, which I think is quite useful. But the other is, I don't know if you've experimented with Perplexity.ai. I have no vested interest. I love the way that it references things. I love the way that it is able to use what is on the internet rather than the version that was up until September. Candidly, I've stopped using Google. I mean, it's much. I think it's much better. I might confirm things, but and it's useful for shopping and band tickets and so on. But as a means of answering questions in the way that you remember, good old Ask Jeeves was when that came along. That was, you were supposed to put human-like questions in and get human-like answers, and it was rubbish. My sense is that Google has been spending all of its time working out how to take advertising dollars off corporates, small people, and users, and has been rather left behind. But anyway, listen, they've had a pretty good 25-year run, as they've been boasting this week on. But no, I think Perplexity is very interesting. Listen, I've got a kind of Columbo question for you, because I was brought up on 70s TV. In the way that you work with data, maybe particularly in your tube maps of bands and other stuff, is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have done?
Not too bad. No, I can't think. One thing I suppose I'm so indebted to spreadsheets. And one thing I had this question for an interview. It was over the phone line. I was being interviewed for a job out in the Middle East, which I wasn't really keen on anyway. And one of these questions they do, I don't know whether not everybody gets asked the same question, is how would you describe a spreadsheet to your grandmother? I just thought, well, God, I've been living with them for years. Why don't you ask me about spreadsheet? This is the head of creativity. And then I sort of thought, well, yeah, it makes sense. And I said a spreadsheet is basically, how would you describe it to an older person? We're all old people, an older person. And I said, well, it's a load of boxes floating around in the air, which you can connect. And these spreadsheets were first embraced as a young man to basically help my career and the work I was doing improve. I'm now up to my elbows in the buggers still for all the other stuff that's happened in my life. I'm still using these boxes, which I tied together with bits of data string, and which somehow magically just make things make sense. I do. I think the spreadsheet's the best thing that has been invented, actually.
I absolutely adore the floating boxes you connect tied together with data strings that magically make sense of things. That's the most elegiac description of Excel numbers and any other spreadsheet I think I've ever heard. That's beautiful. That is fantastic. Now, Mike, can you tell us where our listeners and our viewers can find out about you and what you're up to online, on social media, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, due to the wonders of AI, my SEO is really great. Mike Bell Maps, you'll find me generally across the internet. Band maps, tube maps of band maps, and those sort of words. I do all that stuff. On Instagram, Mike Bell Maps, and TikTok I've been forced to do with a gun against my head by my son, which I went viral on for a moment, and then I've disappeared again, so that's good. Mike Bell, look my name up, add in a maps or poems or whatever you want to add to it, really.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Mike. I think if there were only more people with your lateral, artistic and creative approach to using data smarter, there'd be rather less malarkey in the world of data visualization and rather more data-driven common sense. Mike Bell of Mike Bell Maps, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Lovely. Thank you, Sam. It's been great fun.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.